Geneva, Switzerland, April 10, 2025. The air in the Global Governance Summit was thick with whispers and prideful glances. Suits shimmered, cameras clicked, and egos filled the room heavier than the scent of cologne. On the stage sat men and women used to applause, presidents, lawmakers, corporate giants. And in the far left chair, President Ibrahim Traoré, military uniform crisp, eyes scanning. He wasn't meant to be there, or so some thought. A U.S. senator, gray-haired with a smirk buried beneath rehearsed charm, leaned into his mic and with a voice soaked in disdain said, "Some troublemakers disguise themselves as reformers. President Traoré, I'm talking about you. You've undermined peace efforts in West Africa and threatened international security." The room froze. Gasps echoed. Journalist pens paused mid-air. Cameras zoomed. Traoré looked at him, calm, still, but he didn't speak. Seconds passed, uncomfortably, until he finally leaned in, voice low and cold. "You call us troublemakers for refusing to be your puppets?" Silence. Then applause. But behind that applause, behind the cheer of the moment, something broke. An old wound, one the world had covered for too long. And tonight, it was bleeding. The clip of Traoré's response tore through the internet like fire through dry grass. Within minutes, Traoré clapped back, "Africa rising. Puppet no more," all trending. But inside the summit hall, the air shifted. Every glance toward Traoré carried something new: respect, fear, and for some, shame. A BBC journalist whispered to her cameraman, "Did he just flip the entire summit with one sentence?" He had. But what few knew was, Traoré hadn't planned to speak that day. His advisors had warned him, "Stay quiet, don't make enemies. This is a Western stage." But Traoré hadn't flown from Ouagadougou to perform. He flew to represent. That night in his hotel room, he sat alone. No celebration, no calls, just silence. And the weight of the truth he carried, not for himself, but for those who never made it to the stage, for those buried beneath mines in Congo, for mothers who boiled cassava leaves in plastic to feed their children, for children who spoke French better than their own tribe's tongues. He wasn't crying, but his silence was. In the morning, they tried to bury it. The press team for the U.S. senator issued a statement. The comment was misunderstood. Senator X has always supported African stability. But it was too late. The world had seen the exchange and felt it. In Nairobi, schoolchildren painted Traoré on classroom walls. In Brazil, Afro-descendant activists marched with signs reading, "We are not puppets." Even in France, students in Lyon held silent sit-ins quoting his words. But at the summit, backlash brewed. A powerful Western diplomat pulled Traoré aside during coffee break. "Look," she whispered, "you made your point. Don't push it. Let's not make this about colonial history." Traoré looked at her, then pointed to a chart displayed behind her. Global resource extraction in Africa, 412 billion in 2024. Less than 4% remained on the continent. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The truth was already louder than anything he could scream, but the real story wasn't the applause. It wasn't the viral clip. It was what came after. Because somewhere, in the audience, a tearful young man from Ghana was watching. And what he did next would change everything. His name was Kwaku, just 17. Skin the color of warm earth. Eyes filled with questions. He watched the summit on a cracked tablet, huddled with 5 others in a quiet corner of Accra. When Traoré said, "You call us troublemakers for refusing to be your puppets?" Kwaku felt it punch straight through his chest. He stood up, shaking. "I need to do something," he whispered. "Do what?" his friend asked. "You're just a kid." But Kwaku wasn't listening. He was already typing, fingers trembling. A video, 1 minute long. His face raw and honest. His voice unpolished. I'm not a president. I'm not rich. I don't even own shoes that don't leak in the rain. But when Traoré spoke, I felt like someone finally saw me, finally stood for me. For my mother who cleans offices at night. For my sister who missed school because of mining trucks. He posted it with the caption, "Thank you, Traoré." From a boy who matters. By dawn, 2 million views. By noon, BBC had called. Kwaku wasn't famous, but in that moment he became a mirror, reflecting the pain and hope of millions who'd been invisible. Until now. Inside the summit hall, a quiet war had begun. Not with weapons, but with whispers. Behind closed doors, some Western delegates urged the organizers to remove Traoré from the second-day panel. He's turning this into a protest, one murmured. He's stirring resentment, another warned. But no one dared say it publicly, because outside the world had chosen sides. And the people were not silent anymore. A leaked email revealed that one Western country threatened to pull funding from an African health program unless Traoré is reined in. The news spread fast, and for the first time, the summit's noble face cracked wide open. That night, Traoré stood on his hotel balcony, looking out at the Geneva skyline. Lights glittered like stars, but he felt no peace, not because of the threats, but because the truth had always come at a price. He thought of Sankara, Lumumba, Nkrumah, men who spoke like him, men who were silenced. But tonight, it was different. He wasn't alone. A boy in Ghana had answered his voice with another, and tomorrow he would speak again, not with rage, but with something more dangerous, truth, backed by love. Day 2 of the summit. Traoré's name was on the panel list, front row, center. But when the session began, his chair was empty. Speculation spread like fire. Was he detained? Did he flee? Did the U.S. pressure Burkina Faso to recall him? But the truth? He was walking, alone, through a small district in Geneva, past souvenir shops, past busy cafes, until he arrived at a quiet park, where a dozen African refugees, some sleeping on benches, were gathered. He sat among them. He didn't speak like a president. He just listened. One woman, eyes red from crying, whispered, "When they bombed our village in Mali, they said it was to keep peace. But what kind of peace burns children alive?" Traoré didn't answer. He took her hand, held it tight. A photo was taken. Him on the ground, head bowed, among the forgotten. It went viral before he even returned, and by the time he stepped back into the summit building, late, shoes dusty, his empty chair had become a symbol that leadership is not about sitting higher than others, but about sitting beside those no one else sees. As Traoré stepped into the summit hall, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his chief advisor back in Burkina Faso. "We found something, hidden in the French military archives left behind. You need to see it." A scanned letter, dated 1961. He opened the file. It was handwritten, faded. From a young African soldier forcibly conscripted into the French colonial army, addressed to his unborn son, "If I die fighting for a flag that is not mine, tell my son that I never forgot who I was. Tell him we were kings before they called us slaves." Traoré froze. This wasn't a history lesson. This was a wound, alive. And the signature? K.S. Traoré, his grandfather. Tears blurred his vision, not because of pain, but because suddenly everything made sense. His rage, his courage, his refusal to bow. He wasn't just answering today's insults. He was answering generations of silence. And now, it wasn't just a summit. It was a reckoning. The summit's third day began with a surprise announcement. President Traoré had requested an unscheduled 7-minute address. Some delegates rolled their eyes. But when he stepped onto the stage holding a single paper, a silence fell. He unfolded it slowly. "This," he said, "was discovered in abandoned archives of French intelligence in Burkina Faso. It's a list of 48 African journalists, poets, and professors marked as information threats. And all of them disappeared between 1960 and 1995. He held it up, names in faded ink. "This one," he said, voice shaking, "was my uncle." Cameras flashed. Some delegates squirmed. Others looked away. But he didn't stop. "I was told to sit here today and celebrate peace and progress. But how do we celebrate peace when the ghosts of our thinkers, our truth-tellers, still cry from unmarked graves?" A tear ran down his cheek, unhidden, unashamed. "And if telling this truth makes me a troublemaker," he looked around the hall, "then may we raise a generation of troublemakers who will never forget." The room was still. And then, from the back row, one old woman stood and clapped, then another, then the whole room, except one man. The U.S. Senator who had first called Traoré a troublemaker had been quiet, absent since day one. But on the final day, he returned. Flanked by aides, face tight, he asked to respond. The summit chair hesitated, then allowed it. He stepped to the microphone, cleared his throat, and looked straight at Traoré. "I've served in American politics for over 30 years. I've met kings, warlords, CEOs." Pause. "But I've never been silenced by a man who said so little and meant so much." The room tensed. "But let me be clear," he continued. "The United States stands by its allies, and if you challenge our influence, there will be consequences." Traoré didn't blink. The senator turned to leave, but then stopped. "And yet," he said, voice lowering, "when my father fought in Algeria, he told me the African soldiers were braver than anyone in his unit. He never forgot them. He looked back one last time. My father would have stood and clapped for you. And then he left. Not angry, not ashamed, just changed." 3 days after Traoré's speech, something strange happened in Paris. Thousands gathered at Place de la République. No music, no shouting, just candles and silence. Each person held up a single name from the list of 48 Traoré had read aloud. Names long buried, names erased. Police expected protests. What they got was mourning. A grandmother knelt in front of a photo. Her brother, an African student who disappeared in 1971 after writing a book about colonial schools. She hadn't seen his name in 54 years, until Traoré spoke it. In Senegal, tears fell in living rooms. In Haiti, churches rang bells. In Jamaica, a radio host paused mid-song and whispered, "Africa is speaking, and this time, the world is listening. No riots, just grief. Because when a people aren't allowed to remember their dead, the world should weep when someone finally does." And that's exactly what was happening. Back in Burkina Faso, a dusty village received a visitor. An old Frenchman, white hair, slow steps, stepped off a motorbike and asked for someone named Traoré. The villagers pointed to the presidential residence on TV. "No, not him," the old man smiled. "His mother. I knew her father." They brought him to her. He held a yellowed envelope, trembling. "This is from 1961. I was a medic. Your father gave it to me, but I never had the courage to send it." She opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a second letter. Another voice. From a man buried in history. "If our sons must speak with fire, it is because we were forced to speak with silence. If our daughters must cry, let it be the last time they cry for a stolen name." She dropped the paper, fell to her knees, and sobbed. The cameras didn't see it. But that moment, a mother holding her father's voice, was the summit behind the summit. And when President Traoré heard the news, he wept for the first time in public, not for politics, but for the boy in him who had finally come home. Back in Geneva, the final day of the summit arrived with unexpected news. The UN Secretary General had made an unplanned stop to attend the closing session. Word spread quickly. He walked in, solemn, holding a sealed black folder. When he took the stage, the room stilled. "I came," he said, "because something has shifted, not in policy, but in conscience." He opened the folder. Inside was a single-page declaration. Effective immediately, the UN would launch a global commission to investigate the Cold War disappearances of African intellectuals between 1955 and 1995. It would be named the Sankara Traoré Truth Project. The room erupted, but Traoré didn't smile. He simply bowed his head. He hadn't come to win, he came to witness, and now the world was not just watching him, it was watching itself. For the first time in decades, the sky over Geneva didn't echo with jets or speeches or deals. It was quiet, like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. In Burkina Faso, schools stopped for 1 hour at noon, not because of a holiday, because of a letter. Teachers passed out copies of the 1961 letter, written by Traoré's grandfather. Every child read it aloud, line by line, their voices cracking. And then, quietly, each student picked up a stick and wrote a single word in the dirt. Remember. In one village, a little girl named Aicha cried as she traced the final sentence of the letter. "If we die before freedom, let it be known we never died silent." She looked up at her teacher. Did he die in pain? The teacher didn't know what to say, so she hugged Aicha and cried with her. Across Africa, a silent storm was spreading, not one of fire, but of memory. And in a world that had forgotten Africa's soul, Africa was now making the world remember. One child, one letter, one tear at a time. It was 3:11 a.m. in Washington, D.C. The U.S. president picked up the red phone in the residence. On the other end, Traoré, calm, direct. "I want you to understand," Traoré said. "This isn't about hate, it's about healing. But healing doesn't begin until the wound is seen." There was silence. Then Traoré said something that made the most powerful man in the world sit up straight. "Tomorrow, I will return all military aid. We will keep no bases. We will build our future from soil, not steel." "You'll collapse without us," the president said. "No," Traoré replied, voice steady. "We collapsed with you." And he hung up. That morning, Pentagon analysts called it a geopolitical disaster. CNN called it the boldest act of African independence since the 1960s. But in Ouagadougou, old men fell to their knees praising God. Women ululated in the streets. A blind poet wrote 4 verses in Braille. Traoré had not declared war. He had declared freedom. And the world wasn't sure whether to salute him or beg him to stop. In a forgotten town in Guinea, 12 women gathered beneath a mango tree. They wore all white, no jewelry, no shoes. Each held a photo of a son who never came home. All were once student activists. All disappeared between 1978 and 1986. One mother, nearly 90, whispered, "We kept these pictures in plastic. Every year the rain came, but we saved them." A journalist from Al Jazeera found them, recorded their stories, aired them worldwide. When Traoré saw it, he sent a handwritten note. "To the mothers who waited while the world forgot, we see you now, and we will wait with you until their names live again." That night, one of the mothers died in her sleep, photo still in her hands. She had waited 44 years. She didn't live to see her son's grave, but she died knowing the silence had been broken. and as her coffin was lowered into the red earth, a child nearby asked, "Mama, will she see him now?" The priest didn't answer. He just cried, and for once the heavens did too. It rained that day, soft, slow, like an apology from the sky. It was the final day of the summit. They gave him only 5 minutes. The stage lights dimmed. Delegates leaned in. Cameras were live across 6 continents. Traoré walked to the podium. No papers, no teleprompter. He looked across the room, then into the lens. "I did not come here to be liked. I came here because my ancestors were never invited into rooms like this. They were enslaved, erased, and buried under someone else's narrative." He took a breath. "You say I reject peace? No. I reject puppet peace, the kind built on fear and silence." He stepped closer. "I don't want aid. I want dignity. I don't want applause. I want truth. And I don't want to raise another African child who must choose between freedom and survival." A tear slid down his cheek. "You may forget my name, but promise me one thing. Remember the names of the ones you never let live long enough to speak." He stepped down. No music, no fanfare, just silence, and the sound of people standing, one by one, until the whole room was on its feet, weeping. Traoré left Geneva that night. No press conference, no interviews. But he left something behind. In his seat at the summit, a leather envelope rested. Inside, 48 handwritten letters, one for each of the names he read aloud, each addressed to the families they left behind, each written in Traoré's own handwriting. One line was repeated in every letter. "You are not erased. You are written on the soul of our future." A UN intern discovered the envelope. When she opened it, she collapsed in tears. She was Congolese. One of the names was her uncle. She had never known what happened to him. Her mother never spoke of it, said it was too dangerous. But now she knew he hadn't died forgotten. He had died resisting. She took the letters to a printing house in Geneva and personally funded 5,000 copies. Within a week, the collection became known as the last letters of the stolen generation. They now sit in libraries across 37 countries. Traoré never claimed credit, because his greatest gift wasn't his voice. It was restoring the voices of others. A month later, back in Burkina Faso, a new monument stood along the Convey River. Simple, no marble, no gold, just a tall stone with the names of 48 people engraved in sunlight. At the center, an empty chair carved from wood facing the river. Every evening, people come and sit in silence. Sometimes children sing, sometimes no one speaks. One day, Traoré came alone. No guards, no cameras. He sat in the chair for hours. Finally, a little girl approached. "Are you sad?" she asked softly. He smiled. "No, just remembering." "Will they come back?" she asked, pointing to the names. He looked at her, and with the gentlest voice said that they never left. "They're in your voice now." She ran off singing, and for the first time in many generations, a silence that once haunted Africa now hummed with memory, strength, and pride. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Drop a comment right now. Tell us which part touched your soul. Like this video if you believe Africa deserves its voice, and hit subscribe if you're ready to be part of the stories the world forgets to tell. Because this isn't just content. This is memory. This is healing. This is truth. Let them cry. Let them remember. And let them never scroll past silence again.